maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself and about the Ellis Network to kind of get things going. That would be wonderful.
Oh, absolutely. And first of all, thank you all so much for having me, and not just picking the book and reading it, but for having me here, inviting me into your virtual living room. And I'm really glad you guys enjoyed it. And just to double check, is everybody finished, or is anybody still not quite done yet? Because if so, I will do my best to avoid spoilers.
I think it's probably just easiest to assume that everybody has finished it, because, I mean, it was our book for October. So, I mean, it was highly readable. But if anybody is, no, you know what? Go ahead and spoil.
Okay, sorry for anybody who's not quite there yet, but I'll spoil away. As I said, I've written 6 previous books, 4 set in ancient Rome, 2 in Renaissance Italy. I've had a mother with a history degree, so I was, as a kid, getting, stories about Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon, and rather than, 3 Little Pigs, and I was hearing this kind of stuff from when I was young and watching Claudius instead of the Disney Channel. So history is where I gravitated. Ancient world I love, and I certainly love the Renaissance too, but I happened to read a really fantastic nonfiction book called Women Heroes of World War I, which had a wonderful set of essays on women that, for the most part, I had never heard of through any schooling that I had done. And one of these stories was about Louise de Bettigny, who ran the Ellis Network. And that really set off a lot of flashing lights. And I wanted to tell that story, even though it was very different from anything I'd done before. And so that ended up being the original germ or seed for the Ellis Network. And I'm going to see if I can pull it out, but I'll see if I can find it on my shelf over there. It's a very cramped shelf. But anyway, that's how the Ellis Network originally got inspired.
Okay, wow. Awesome. And was this like your favorite book, or like being such a departure from the other books you've written? How did you feel about this, or like, will you go on to write more in this kind of genre, or back to Greek?
I can't say it's my favorite book, because that always changes with every book that I'm writing. Pretty much every book that I'm currently writing is my favorite until I get to get really deep in the copy editing or in the editing process, when I hate the book with the fire of 1,000 suns and I want to throw it on the nearest fire and never speak of it again. Fortunately, this always passes. So for this, I've loved all my books, and this one I loved writing. It was remarkable. I won't say easy, because it was very difficult in some ways, being so different from what I'd done before, but it was exciting, and the voices spoke to me very loudly. It's like I didn't have to, I could hear them in my ear all the time. It was great. It was a scary thing in some ways, doing something so different from what I'd done before. It was a real sort of leap into space, because when you get into historical research, I've written 4 books in ancient Rome, 2 in the Renaissance, and after all the books I've read to research those novels, I have that information at my fingertips. It's not hard to go swimming back into that world. And when I am taking a dive into a completely new historical era, there's so much you have to learn to get the kind of, familiarity that you need to be able to write in that world with confidence. So it was scary, but it was still tremendously rewarding.
And what is it like because the last books you wrote were a series. So how is it, like, is this going to be a series? Could this be a series?
No, I did conceive this as a standalone, and it's going to stay that way. I do series, but after a while it does, the world building can be a little, it can start to box you in, because you realize that you made some choice, 4 books ago that is now biting you in the butt, and you can't do anything about it. So this is a standalone, and it's very much conceived that way. But I will say I did, in the current book that I have, which is another 20th century, World War II centric, a dual timeline, I did give Eve a cameo. She turns up about a year after the events of the Ellis Network finish up, and she's, actually just returning from France from where she's been seeing her goddaughter, and she is still, drinking whiskey and swearing a bit and flirting with Scotsmen.
Nice. I love that. I actually have a question kind of along the same line, and it's from Diane from the Toronto Girly Book Club, and she was wondering why didn't begin her book by stating something like that this was, and I quote, based on true events. Why did you save that for the end?
Just normally speaking, it tends to be, the whole discussion of what's true and what isn't tends to be saved for the author's note, and I kind of have to put that at the end because there are so many spoilers in an author's note, and I don't want to take the chance that people will read that first. And as far as how much front matter you put in the beginning, it's that can be a little bit of a decision process, because if you have too much that gets in the way of the reader actually getting to the story, I've sometimes found that sometimes people feel like they're getting homework, like if they have to wade through too much before they get to the story. So just as far as layout, it was a decision I think the publisher really made, probably a bit more than me, but certainly if it was a movie, you would have that based on true events there. I tend to just save that for the author's note, so it's a pleasant surprise for anybody who thinks that it was, fantasy all the way through.
Well, it's funny, and I understand why Diane asked that, because for me, I felt like I needed to go back and reread it, because you approach it very differently when you know that it's a true story.
Yeah, and the fun thing about this particular tale was that it's one way I love author's notes, is that quite often the things that are the most weird, the most absolutely wackadoodle, is the stuff that's actually real. And I have seen this over and over in history, and I come even to expect it when I read it, especially with, for books by friends of mine. When I come across something really strange, I look at it and I'm like, that has to be real, because she would not have dared make that up. So, when you come to things like, I would never have made up anything along the lines of the fact that, she once ran into, the Crown Prince of Bavaria on a train station, and he lent her his car so she could get to her rendezvous. Yet that really happened.
Right.
So,
yeah.
That's the kind of thing that history gives you, and it's delicious, and it's so much fun to work in, because you're just like, that really happened, and that's so great.
Yeah, that's cool. And going back to the research and the places, and I know you talked about those essays, but did you actually go and visit some of the places that are in the book to do the research, or was it all written from this side of the pond?
It was written from this side of the pond. I would have loved, believe me, to go to France and rent a vintage car and drive with the top down and, follow the characters' feet. That would have really been great, stopping at a lot of little cafes along the way. But I couldn't actually do that. It was written in 2015, which was a somewhat tumultuous year because our house had just burned down. So we literally spent the entire year frantically catching up with, renovations and all of that. And I wrote this entire book sort of hammering away on the couch at a rented apartment. And there really wasn't any time or, even remotely for traveling that year, which is a pity. But I have, in previous trips over to Europe, been to quite a few of the places. I have been to London and Paris. I have been to a couple of the other spots, although there are some cities in there like Limoges that I have not seen. I wish I could have seen Oradour-sur-Glane. I haven't. The only thing I could do there was, put myself down there with Google Maps and, look at hundreds and hundreds of photographs and maps and sort of put myself, be able to literally walk and imagine, with the buildings on each side. One thing I did put in very much for me was that one trip to the south of France, a very long time ago, I literally was in high school, was culminated in a trip to Grasse. And I loved that particular city and the flower fields around it, and I saw the perfume factories, and it made a huge impression on me. And it's not as famous maybe as Nice or Cannes or some of the other big Riviera spots, but it's such a beautiful city that I decided that was going to be the place where I would put the action at the end of the book, just so I could, revel in the scenery and the memory again.
Amazing. That's great. And you just said you were talking about I'm going to say it wrong, Oradour-sur-Glane, not exactly sure. But was that portion of it hard to write?
That was, and it really was hard to write, and because, not only because it was such a horrendous event, but because I ended up using the almost exactly real words from the woman named Madame Ruffanche, who was a very real woman and who lived to be very old. She was the only survivor from inside the church. And I had testimony from her that she later gave as a witness in the trial of some of the surviving SS officers when they were tried, I think, at Bordeaux, and about 5 years later, beyond the events of the Ellis Network. And her testimony is incredibly moving, and it's her, just the picture of her is incredibly moving, this woman and what she went through. And in a way that made it easier, in the sense that I felt at least I didn't have to do justice to this event. She had already done that by living through it and by telling it. So all I had to do was, shape her words a little bit, put them into the scene and let her speak. But even so, it was a very hard thing to do, just because it was an incredibly tragic day.
Absolutely. Just reading it, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it's a much more famous site in France, because, it is this ghost town that you can still go see today, and it looks just like that. I mean, it's just getting more crumbly. But it's not very well known in America, or I think abroad from France, this particular event, just because there are so many, massacres at the end of the war, so many tragic things that happened, that the fate of this one little town sort of gets folded into the overall tragedy of what the Germans did in France. But even so, I think it's an incredibly poignant bit of history, and I was glad to be able to, try to shed a bit more light on it.
Absolutely. Speaking of the war, of course, which the book covers both the World War I and II, and our Denver girls would like to know why there wasn't much discussion of Eve's work in the Second World War.
Fun. I'm glad you noticed that. That was because I wanted, for one thing, I didn't think there was really room for it. The book was packed enough as it was with her activities there. And for another, I did say that I wanted to leave this as a standalone book, and that's true. But I do always like the idea of cameos and such things. And I kind of thought that there's a possibility Eve could pop up in another book someday if I do another World War II centric novel. And it would be fun to have her even as a minor character or something along those lines. So I decided, but I didn't yet know, what kind of book that was going to be, or if it would ever even happen. So I decided to leave in a reference that she did do some work in World War II, but to leave the door as open as possible, so that I had, again, it's that thing when you write connected books, you haven't boxed yourself in with a decision you made in a book that's already published. And I don't have her, as I said, as a large character in the next book. She really just makes a one-scene cameo, and hopefully that scene will stay, because I really like it. But it is a journalist who meets her after the war, and who remembers that he met her during the Blitz, when she was literally sitting around with, you could see her sitting in a bombed-out cafe, pulling, glass chunks out of her hair and reading a newspaper as, bombs are falling all around, cool as a cucumber. That's why he remembers her so well. And all he knows is that when he asked, what exactly does she do, somebody just said, she does something incredibly vague for the SOE, the Special Operations Executive. So I've still left myself an open door there. I don't know. I'd like to explore that, even have her do something maybe with the SOE, or maybe she just trains the girls who do. I'm really not sure. We'll see.
Cool. Well, we're looking forward to find out. One of the questions I had myself,
I'm sure it's cool.
One of the questions I had myself is, what did you envision happened at the end of the book? After the book is finished, what happened to Finn and Charlie?
Oh, well, I think they're going to run a really very nicely successful little business down there in Grasse. They're going to have, he's going to be just the kind of guy who can, rebuild a car and do all kinds of restoration work and fix cars, and, people bring him cars to work on, and he'll love doing that. And Charlie will have her little attached cafe, and she's just the kind of girl who will run the business and make sure he doesn't lose the receipts, and make sure that he remembers to file the taxes. So I think they're going to do very nicely, and the two of them will be very happy there. And I think Eve is going to visit, drop in always unexpectedly, at least once a year, and have a chance to visit. And she, I think, is going to have a somewhat exciting life, and is going to go around the world and hunt things and have adventures and travel, and kind of make up for the lost time that she spent just, holed up in her house. So she's going to start, rebuilding her life and putting herself back together. And she's probably never going to get to the sleep all the way without nightmares, because that's not how PTSD works. But she's going to be a lot in the long run, and she'll have this little visit. And just as a little bit of trivia, I actually intended up until about, I'd say, the 80% mark that Eve was going to die in the end. So it occurred to me as I was writing it, as I went along, I realized I don't think that's going to work after all. And actually, that's great, because I really don't want to kill her. So I was just pleased that I could give her a happy ending in the end after everything else. So.
I was in Phoenix when we were discussing this book, and one thing that came up at that meeting was just how young Eve actually is. Because, like, when you first read those first pages and she's drunk and haggard, I envisioned someone so much older. But as you discuss, like, how much life she actually has left, it just brings to light that she's actually quite young.
Well, yeah, it's like she's only 22 when she starts out in the Ellis Network, and then even by the end, it's like we think of World War I and World War II as very disparate things. It's easy to forget that they're less than 40 years apart. That's, it's not that long a span of time, which is why there is such a hangover in France. By the time World War II starts, it feels like their last war just ended. They're still feeling these wounds very, very deeply. And so Eve she's only 53 by the end. She's got plenty of life left, and she's got plenty of kicking still to do. So that was, again, one of the reasons I like the idea that, she will be able to, after having lost a number of years, just trying to not fall apart and not commit suicide, she will be able to get the latter half of her life back.
Great. And we're going to just change gears here a little bit. We have a question from Valerie, and she wants to know if it was difficult to write and weave together the two storylines and viewpoints of Eve and Charlie so seamlessly.
Not so much. I mean, it was definitely a challenge, because I did conceive of the two storylines that there would be a certain number of parallels between them. And so I had to do some careful matching to make sure that, because also there's the rules of storytelling, which is each woman's arc has its various high points and low points. So you need to make sure that, Charlie's dark point is coming around the same time as Eve's dark point, but one doesn't overshadow the other, and so forth. And so it was a challenge, and it's a bit like putting a puzzle together, especially when you're, sort of going from one chapter to the next, and you're trying to make a connection there that the reader will get and will appreciate, so that it doesn't feel too dislocated, like you're jarred from one story to the next. So it's a challenge, but it's a challenge I really liked. I know some writers who prefer to write each story out A to Z and then separately, and then cut them, then interweave them afterward. But I actually went back and forth chapter by chapter, first Eve's, then Charlie's, and so forth. And wandering outlines chapters. I do a lot of outlining. I did it this book, I have to admit, because I did I outlined each one A to Z first, and then when I wrote, I intercut going back and forth. But I did outline each one completely, more or less, before I even put a word on paper. But yeah, it was a challenge, and it was fun. And I think it may have made me a little crazy, though, because I decided for whatever reason that the book I'm writing now is, yeah, no problem. But the book I'm writing now is actually triple timeline rather than dual timeline, and frankly, I was nuts, and I should never have tried that, and it'll probably kill me. But there you go.
Lauren, I have your questions here, so I can ask them, or I can unmute you. It's completely up to you. You put your hand up, so I'm very happy to unmute you.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. I accidentally sent my question to everyone, and Kate just answered it.
No problem.
I know I asked like 5 more privately earlier, but I'll give everyone else some room now that I got one.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I might have missed some of that. What did I miss?
No, she just, no problem at all. She has just asked some questions by text message. So she actually wants to know a little bit about your writing style and how you began writing novels and how that came about.
Well, I was writing novels. I was writing from pretty much my whole life. I did my first story when I was 7, and which was literally all about the assassination of Edward II, because I had a Kings and Queens of England paper doll book. So there you go. And then I wrote my first book when I was 10. It was 121 double-spaced pages of pure awful, and no one will ever see it, ever. I probably should burn it so it's not blackmail material, potentially, but that was getting started, and I literally never stopped. I've always been writing a book at some point. It's what I do. If I wasn't published, I would be writing them and I would be putting them in drawers. So it's what I just love doing, and I feel incredibly lucky to be able to do this for a living.
Amazing. Well, I do have a comment here from one of our members, and she just, it's more of a comment than a question, but she says she wanted to commend you for highlighting PTSD for these characters. She said it was real, tasteful, and honest, and each character handled it and suffered it in their own way.
Oh, thank you very much, because that was very much that was really a huge intention with this book, and how each of these characters does have some kind of PTSD, whether they've been in combat or not. It's something I'm very passionate about, and that I have seen in a lot of friends and loved ones, because my husband is active duty Navy. He just finished a year in Bahrain, for example. He's done destroyer duty. And I have a lot of friends through the Navy through him, and I have seen all kinds of PTSD from people, and he has seen it too in his junior guys who are underneath him. So it's something I feel extremely strongly about, and I'm really glad it resonated for you. So.
Great. If anybody, so Jennifer just said.
I finally figured out how to open the comments on the side, so I'm looking along to see if I missed any.
You don't have to worry about it. I'll make sure that they all get asked. But I mean, you're very, very welcome to read them. But actually, Jennifer's just written that she's a police officer, so it really touched her.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
If anybody else has a question, please feel free to ask in the right hand column, or raise your hand if you want to be really outgoing. A question that, hello.
That is my husband. And I did want to tell you, I think something you might find fun. He actually was a big part of inspiration for Eve, because, and was my sort of technical advisor. Keep the dogs quiet. He was my technical advisor for a lot of it, because, and the dog's going to join the party too.
I love it.
But my decision to give Eve a stammer was because of Stephen here, who has had one his entire life.
Really?
And so that was the decision to give her a stammer, and he helped me fine tune the dialogue for it, for all of my rough drafts. And it's one of those things, again, I felt extremely strongly about, because I've literally seen 17 years since we first met of, how the world interacts with people who have a stammer.
It's interesting, to say the absolute least.
Well, and it's just that whole thing, like all the things that Eve faces, people who deduct IQ points the moment they see the way she talks, or
I love that.
or, people who, just sort of or who try to run over you and finish your sentences for you, or
that's awesome too.
Or people who just, they make all kinds of assumptions about you because of speech. And it was one of those things that I wanted to see her take what a lot of people could see as a weakness, and she uses that instead as a weapon against them. And so, but anyway, because of this guy.
Well, yeah, it was honestly one of the, it was just like an impulse suggestion that I had, where I was just like, hey, make her stutter like me. And I didn't expect Kate to actually really take me seriously, but just out of the blue, she was just like, oh, okay. And I'm like, well, yeah. I mean, because like if you look at the way stuttering is portrayed, especially throughout history and even into modern pop culture, the person with the speech impediment is either like the bumbling village idiot or the serial killer. Like you never see a person with a speech impediment, in any kind of fiction that is just like, yeah, no, I'm actually pretty okay. I've learned how to deal. I've tried to get rid of it. And that didn't really work so well, so I'll just use it to annoy my superior officers. Which which I do. But so, like, I kind of suggested it just on an impulse, and yeah, she took me up on it. So I was like, hey, screw it. Cool. Peace.
And I will also say it's one of those things that
I'm out.
it's one of those things too that stammering is, I mean, I wouldn't say, it sounds pompous to say it's like, I want to shine a light on this, you know, like it's so self-important.
Just kidding. I'm back. What?
But it's still one of those things that it's kind of seen as acceptable still to laugh at. If you will still see, you know, if you go to the opera, and I'll get to opera, I know somebody asked about that. If you go to the opera, there are still parts that are, you know, like Don Curzio in Marriage of Figaro was played with a comic stammer, and that's still done today. And it's kind of one of those things you're like, you know, maybe that's something most disabilities people realize you should not laugh at, but having a speech impediment is still one of those things often people still feel free to. So it's one of those things that I kind of wanted to address that a little bit as well, just that it can be a matter of huge frustration for the people who deal with it, and it's not just simply something that they do for laughs. And
have you ever tried not stuttering? Thanks, Carl. I've only been dealing with this for 35 out of my 37 years. This is the first time I've ever just decided not to stutter. That is a bang on suggestion. Thank you.
Anyway, I did notice that somebody asked about studying music. I actually was an opera singer, or studied opera rather, when I was in school, and I was writing books on the side. And I love music. I love opera. I was a lyric soprano. I don't sing really nowadays. I realize that I always love the music and the singing, but the lifestyle is a tough one, and I realized the lifestyle for writing would suit me better probably. And it was right around that time that I got my first agent, or she picked me up, and I kind of thought, well, I'm going to give this a try and see if it goes anywhere. So that was the decision there.
Okay, wicked. And that was so much fun. I mean, to meet your husband and your dog. I loved it.
Yeah, the dog still is here, so.
We have so many questions rolling in here. I'm going to just hop into the next one.
I can stay on here, so it's no problem.
Okay, so we have Carolyn's asked, she said that she actually lived in Lille and didn't know about this aspect of its history, so that was awesome to find out. But how do you work at seeing the places through the characters' eyes when so much has changed?
You can find historic photographs, thank goodness, and that is, I have to say, a wonderful thing about writing in the 20th century rather than the ancient world. You can't exactly find a picture of, you know, historic photograph of what the Colosseum used to look like when it was first built. Just, you know, maybe a reconstruction. But you can find photographs from the turn of the century and from the wars, and I went in search for those. And I just went in search of, you know, even Google Maps today, you can look around, you can see which buildings were built when, you know, so like, all right, this building, it's a little more worn right now, but it was still there during the time, so I just have to imagine it as a little newer. It is a little tricky always to, you know, be recreating scenes and settings, but, you know, it's part of the fun too. You know, you get to kind of walk around in a different world yourself.
Very cool. Can you talk a little bit about the flower theme in the book?
Oh, yeah. I kind of decided that, you know, it's always fun to, you know, play with a theme. And I actually really like the poet Baudelaire. And I have his poetry that, you know, a nice book of his poetry. And it's particularly lush. And there's a lot of really fantastic imagery in there. And I thought that would be fun to quote. You disappeared suddenly. I hope, can you hear me still?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I thought it would be fun to quote that because there's some fantastic imagery from there that I could pull from. And then I liked the idea of I had the idea that, you know, the fleur de mal, you know, the flowers of evil, you know, that the women themselves could be the flowers too, because the whole theme, if you really want to think about it, is that these are women who were underestimated in so many ways, and that was what made them useful as spies, because women could so often go places and you know, be unobserved where men would be stopped and questioned. So that's one reason women have always been useful in espionage. And I like the idea of this fragility that really conceals a great deal of strength. So I wondered how far could I go with that, you know, with the names, and, you know, so therefore I knew Rose was fictional, so I could give her the name Rose. And for the other two, I do admit I gave them flower names just for fun, you know, code names. They appear to have those code names in real life. But on the other hand, I do have evidence that they did go both Lily, or Louise, and then also her lieutenant Leonie, who was known in the book as Violette. They did go by they had multiple sets of IDs, so who knows? Maybe they actually did go by those names. And the really funny part was I gave Eve the code name of Marguerite just because it also means Daisy, and so that would complete my quartet. And then later on, when I found a primary source in French, my blood absolutely ran cold, because I read finally an original source, which was the Guerre de Femme, which was written by Leonie's husband after the war. And so it was a first-hand account from, the woman who was Lily's right-hand woman. And she actually tells the story of the day that Louise was arrested. And she said, yes, and there was a young girl named Marguerite who was with her. And I was just like, you mean there really was a Marguerite? So I immediately changed it around. I had a different last name at first, but I changed it to be that Marguerite's last name. And it does appear that in that particular bit, that Marguerite, the real one, really was just a local girl who had no idea what she was getting into, had no idea this woman was a spy. But I kind of thought, well, says who? Maybe she was more involved. Maybe they pulled off, like the best coup of all, literally when they were in cells. So that's how I wrote it up, although I used the actual description from the Leonie's book as part of the, as my guide to, make the scene happen.
Very cool. With Rene Gordon Law, he's a terrible character, but was he fun to write?
Oh yeah, I love a good villain. I really do. And if there's anything I really like, is I like a really formidable villain. I moved so the bust isn't creeping you out. I'm sorry. It is a bust of the Muse of History that I have on my shelf. She's a veiled maiden. She's very nice. She doesn't come alive or anything. And nobody has ever used her to break anybody's fingers. So no, it's plaster. It would really break. I've got another one that's marble over there that could really smash some knuckles. I think that's what I kind of got the idea from, because I stare at it every day. But it's Athena. It's not Baudelaire. So in any case, Rene was a lot of fun, because I really enjoyed making him really, really smart. Because if a woman is going to have a nemesis that lasts for, 35 years, he's got to be a really worthy enemy. And so I decided that making him really smart, so that this very smart heroine really has to watch her step around him, was meant for a lot of really fun cat and mouse scenes. And I love cat and mouse scenes. Be my favorite. Anybody else an Outlander fan in here?
Oh, huge.
Well, one of my favorite bits in there was that wonderful bit where Claire and Blackjack Randall are sitting in season 1, are sitting on opposite side of a table, and all she can do is try to talk her way out of this situation. And he knows she's got something, and she's just trying to persuade him that she's harmless, and all she can do is just try to get away from him with nothing more than her wits. And I love that kind of scene, a woman and her wits versus a man who has all the cards, and the woman getting away with it, getting away, and being able to be the one who pulls the wool over and comes out victorious. So Rene was a lot of fun, and I thought it would be fun to show also that, we think of bad guys in wars, we think of the true believers, the ones who are, the hardcore Nazis, the party hardliners, the ones who believe in, their country's power or whatever. But there's also a lot of evil that happens because people are self-interested or collaborating, or they're just simply not interested in anything except profit. And so there's plenty of them in wartime, and they do all kinds of harm.
Well, so rarely do we actually read a book that talks about the war from, like you say, the people, like the French people that were collaborators. And we read the Nightingale not too long ago with book club, and so it's very interesting to see it from a different perspective, for sure.
Yeah, and when you talk about collaborators, it's a very gray area, because there are plenty of people who do some form of collaboration simply to stay alive, or to keep their families from being harmed. And I find it very difficult to be able to condemn people who do have to make those decisions. And it's one of those things, I remember that someone once said that whenever you interview someone in France about, like their time maybe in a war zone, they almost always begin with "c'était compliqué." It was complicated. It always was it always starts with, it was complicated. And I'm sure it was. I mean, these are not easy decisions. I mean, Rene is pretty down the line a bad guy who does very bad things. But on the other hand, there are many people who have to make decisions that they don't like. And it's hard to condemn them for that.
Absolutely. Kelly wants to know if you found an English translation of La Guerre des Femmes.
I have not. I have somebody or other who said that they were trying to track one down, so I think it has been translated at some point, but I have not found one. I had to rely on various online translation programs, which are not very good, and then whenever I needed something really finely translated, I relied on a good friend who is bilingual, and her family, ironically, is from the Lille area. She has whole branches of cousins back there, and we actually found out in the course of my writing this book that when her French cousins were going through the family archives, that she has a great uncle and some great aunts who were very probably involved in the Ellis Network. I actually gave them teeny roles in the book. They are just mentioned. There's a bookseller named Antoine and his teenage sister named Aurélie, who had some very bad experiences at the hands of some German soldiers, and both of them were real people, and so I put them in with the permission of their family.
Oh, wow. Well, that's so curious. We do have another question here from, I don't have a name, but It Mom to Magic. So I'm just going to unmute you now, and you can go ahead and ask your question. We can hear you.
Hello?
Hi.
I can hear you.
I was just saying that I'm joining in. I didn't have a specific question.
Oh, okay. Well, welcome. Thank you for coming.
By the
All right. So, Katie would like to know if you could talk about Captain Cameron and how did you decide the storyline for him and Eve?
He was a real man. He was a real person. So I wanted to use him because, it's good to use real people, and especially when they've accomplished incredible things, I'd like to highlight them, especially if they're not very well known. And I found him very interesting because it's less known really what he did, and it's more like it's not like you're going to get a record of spy activities for the most part. That kind of thing is kind of swept under the rug about what people did. But he leaves this, it's more like the things that people didn't say about him. He left this large spy-shaped hole in the sort of in the areas around him. And he had this interesting past where, he really did go to jail for apparently taking a rap for theft for insurance fraud, actually. And it seems like he may have taken the rap for his wife, who served a teeny bit of time and then was released, and then he served 3 years. So it's like, what's the motivation for that? That's interesting. And then he, because of the war, is able to go back to the army, and he was incredibly capable at recruiting people. I found a picture of him. He looks just pretty much how I described. He's kind of interesting. Yeah. And he had this rather tragic end too, just that, the real man did commit suicide when it appeared that, his career was going to be at an end. And that's one of those things that, again, having the whole theme through the book of PTSD and how it affects people, well, suicide among veterans is one of the great, great tragedies of, modern life as well. And the thing often that does prove a finishing stroke for people who are obsessed with their work, which so many people who are really, really good at this kind of military job are, is that, they always joke, it's a little bit of a black joke that, the number one killer of Navy personnel is retirement. The thing is that people sometimes, if they feel like they've sold their souls for this kind of work and told you can't even do it anymore, can be a really terrible thing. So in my efforts to, kind of show how PTSD affects people in very different ways, it seemed honest to use someone who ultimately failed in his struggle against it and ended up committing suicide. I wouldn't judge him for the decision or just merely mourn that he made it and that I'm sure there were many people who missed him. But he was a really interesting man, and I wanted to use him, and I'm glad you liked him. I liked him a lot.
He was very likable. And you used him and a lot of other, you brought a lot of really important subjects to kind of the forefront in your book, and one being abortion. Kelly has asked here why you decided to pursue the issue of abortion, and more so why it was an issue for both Charlie and Eve.
Well, a couple of reasons there. I wanted Charlie to be pregnant because that would be a useful catalyst for the story to, first of all, get her to Europe in the first place when she's an American, because her family is trying to get this taken care of. And I also wanted to make her pregnant because the trouble with a dual timeline story is that quite often the stakes in one storyline seem higher than the stakes in the other, which can make one storyline almost seem trivial by comparison. And the thing, though, is that, and, with Eve, the things she struggles against, war and spying and, the prospect of arrest or torture. These are very, very high stakes. So Charlie had to be facing something that was not small change by comparison. And so I decided to make her pregnant because, to face and handle a pregnancy is, that's a train that goes through any woman's life in any era, whether it's a good train, like it's something you want, or whether it's something that you very much do not want or are prepared for, it changes everything. And so for Charlie to have that gives her something real and important of her own that she has to face that is comparable to the kinds of things that Eve is even going through in a different way, just in the sense that it upheaves her life. And also to be unmarried and pregnant in 1947, that is a huge problem, and it's not at all trivial. So that's the reason I decided to give her a pregnancy storyline. And I knew from that point that she was going to decide to keep her baby because, it's, in a way, it's something that she's in a post-war situation, and if there's anything that history proves is that when you have wars, they are followed by birth booms. People have the urge to create, to replace the things that are lost. And Charlie, I think, has that urge to some degree herself. She's lost her brother. She has lost Rose. And so she does have this urge to create as well, that in the end, she decides, all right, the right decision for me will be to keep this family and to keep this baby and to start it. And that was good. Now, I decided to put that in for Eve because I always wanted to have there be a certain number of parallels between the two women. They both go through some of the same cities in France. They both get entangled with Scottish men who have a prison in their past, and ultimately they both also tangle with pregnancy. And it was one of those things I wanted to do because, in a sense, having Charlie decide to keep the baby is a safe decision. It does not alienate readers who are, pro-life in their own decisions, and yet, you're still dealing with it. Yet not all women would make the same choice. And so I decided that Eve, who is in a very different situation, if she could face the same problem but come to a very different choice. And that's because, Charlie is surrounded by family. She has money. Even if her family, is problematic, she still has them. She has money of her own. She has people around her. She's living in after a war, where things are rebuilding. She's in a very different situation than Eve is, where Eve is in the middle of a war zone. She's hungry. She's cold. She has no family at all. She's an orphan herself. She's unmarried. She faces, losing her position in this wartime. And these are huge stakes for her, and they're very different from the kind of stakes that Charlie faces. So I wanted to give Eve her own choice there and to make that choice important, because a lot of women in war zones face, when you faced pregnancy, it was, especially if it was, a child by an invader or by a collaborator, you could face, being ostracized by your neighbors. You could face, just the stigma of being the unwed mother, even worse, of course, in World War I. And, these are not small stakes either. They're tremendously problematic. So that's why I decided to explore that, because I wanted to show two women with the same predicament, but who make for themselves very different choices. I thought that was important.
It's so interesting because when you're reading the book, we obviously don't have your take on it and all the research and all the but what's running on in your mind and how you're planning everything. It's just so interesting to talk to the author.
Well, we do a lot of thinking about it. You don't put something down with the idea of like, I'm going to, make this an issue book. But what you do try to do sometimes is just to illustrate through people and try to make them as real of people as you can, where an issue becomes not just a big issue, capital I, that we hear about in the news, but it becomes something extremely personal.
Sure. I can understand that. We're going to change gears and we're going to go to the audiobook world, because have you heard your audiobook?
I haven't listened to the whole thing because I think that would be a little strange for me, but I have heard the narrator, Saskia Marleveld, I think her name is. She's wonderful. And I actually was allowed to pick from the final 2 contenders. They had her and they had another one. And they actually sent me audio clips, not of them reading the Ellis Network, but of them reading, short audition clips essentially. And they showed me, and they even showed me the whole thing of each reader reading first in an English accent and first in an American accent.
Nice.
Because they had that idea that, Charlie's sections be read in an American accent and Eve's in an English accent, which I think is a brilliant idea. I certainly did not have it. And I went with Saskia because I liked, they were both excellent, but I thought she had a slightly younger sounding voice, and it was just a wonderful voice. So I'm really pleased. I've heard some clips of the book here and there, and I think she did a brilliant job.
Well, I got a lot of feedback because actually a lot of our members use the audiobooks. They seem to be becoming more and more popular, but I got a lot of feedback that they thought it was just done so well.
That's great. Yeah, I'm really pleased with it.
I noticed the bookshelf in the back, of behind you, and I'm just wondering, we did have a question early on from Julie. She wanted to know what authors actually inspire you.
Oh, let's see. For historical fiction, I love C.W. Gortner is great. Judith Merkel Riley is wonderful. For another book about female spies, Elizabeth Wine with Codename Verity is terrific. Kate Forsyth from Australia is absolutely wonderful. I love, she has these like fairy tale themes woven in. Bernard Cornwell, if you want, shield walls and sword slashing, I love him. But I read everything. I'll read everything from historical fiction to, I love a good Regency romance if I'm in the mood to laugh. I love space opera. I'll read Lois Bajolde and Pierce Brown and, the guys who do the Expanse novels. And so there's so much I read, and I wish I could be here all night talking books.
Fair enough. If the book was made into a movie, or maybe I can ask this in 2 ways. If the book was made into a movie, do you have any characters that you would want to play? And also, after that, can you just talk a little bit about the Reese Witherspoon connection?
Well, you're not asking me if I would play any of the characters, right? Because I cannot act a lick.
No. What famous celebrities would you want to see?
Yeah, everybody. Well, yes, I do have the dream cast. I will never, even if it became a movie, it's not like I would ever be consulted about a cast, and no author ever is. But it is one of those things. All authors do it. The dream cast situation, and if they say they don't, they're lying. And I'd say this because it's a wonderful way to sit around for an hour and Google pictures of Michael Huisman and call it work. And Michael Huisman is the guy I pick for Finn, to be honest. He was Dario in Game of Thrones, the second one.
Yeah.
And he's in like Age of Adeline and all this other stuff. He's very dreamy. I'd actually pick Tobias Menzies, who was Frank Randall, like in his Frank Randall fedora.
Okay.
I think he'd make a lovely Captain Cameron.
Oh, totally.
Don't worry, I'll send you an author list later. No problem. But let's see, that's one of the guys. I picked Mads Mikkelsen for Rene because he's got that European vibe, and like he can really wear one of those really sharp Hannibal suits. And he's got that thing. He's creepy, but you get the sense that you'd enjoy yourself with, and you just hate yourself afterward. So for the ladies, for Louise or Lily, I would pick, I think you need a French woman for that. I would pick Eva Green. She's got that sort of combination of, sort of fragility and charisma and that smile, and she is French. And I think she's actually also even blonde in real life, so there you go. For the younger Eve, I could pick, I really like Mia Wasikowska in the Michael Fassbender Jane Eyre. She's very good. She's got that kind of She looks about 17, but she's got this sort of flinty eyes looking out of it. And for Charlie, I don't know if anybody's watched Lost Girl, but there's the little actress named Ksenia Solo who plays Kenzie, the sidekick, and she's this teeny little aggressive thing with this all sharp chin and sharp elbows and attitude. And she's also Peggy Shippen in Turn. She's very good. And then older Eve, I don't know, I bogged down there sometimes. I think maybe Kate Blanchett could do it if you gave her kind of roughed her up and deglamorized her a little.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, I do have a dream cast. It's fun. It's harmless. For the Reese Witherspoon thing, yeah, that was a trip. I was coming back from a conference, and I learned about this in the security line. Somebody saying, "Oh my God, have you seen your book is going to be one of 3? They're voting on it." And I literally had something like 20 minutes to hook my laptop up to this horrible airport network and basically get online, throw it up everywhere, beg everybody and their brother who I knew or even who I didn't to vote for me, please, and then get on the plane and then have nothing to do with it for the next 9 hours. So that was exciting. So then I pretty much landed the next morning. I didn't get in until something like 5 in the morning because of all this luggage snafu, and I go to sleep, and by the time I woke up I found out that it won. So it was insane. They were the team that she has is awesome. She has a company, Hello Sunshine. The whole thing is that they're developing film, and they want to do projects that tell women's stories, and they're hugely passionate about that. And her whole team is great. They're just fantastic, and they're all really passionate just about that as an overarching goal. And they wanted to do a Facebook Live event with me at the end of the month, and I said cool. And I was just going to do that, through my phone, but they said, if any chance you might be in LA. And the fact is that, because if so, then we could do it in our studio. We can control the product and everything, and, the lighting and all that. And I was like, why not? I was still in Maryland, but my husband was out here finding us a place to live in San Diego because we were about to start our move. And I thought, well, I need to come out and look at houses with him anyway. So I'll just do the same thing. So I came out, and then I find out 2 days before she's actually going to be the one doing the video with me. And I'm sort of like, okay. Try not to fangirl, because I can honestly say I've been a fan of hers for a long time. I love her stuff. So I went in and I got to meet her. She's fantastic. Like, she came half an hour early just to hang and talk books, and I'm getting makeup done. And it's one of those things that's very easy to tell and I've done a lot of little radio slots and things. It's very easy to tell when someone has actually read your book or when they're actually riffing off of 10 talking points that somebody handed them.
Sure,
It was very easy to tell that she really had read the book and loved it, and that this is the book club thing that she does is not just, a celebrity puff project. I mean, we were talking about other books that her club recommended, and she knew all of them to the fingertips and had this huge reading list, and we were throwing books back and forth that what were favorites of ours. So it's very real that she's a real bookworm. So that was really fun to realize. And the whole thing was fantastic and whirlwind, and I feel incredibly lucky. I mean, I had nothing to do with how it happened. It literally was like getting hit by lightning.
That's so exciting and so interesting to hear. I mean, I'm a big fan as well. So, and I love that she's legit.
It's one of those things where you can always think it's how much is this something you do for yourself, and how much is this something you do for an Instagram photo? And no, it's very legit. I mean, and her, there's the whole group of the ladies at Hello Sunshine where they were saying things oh God, she reads constantly. She's reading everywhere. It's pretty much every day there's almost, did you read this? And then you have to grab another book and read it, because there's no such thing as, no, I haven't read that. You need to read it and keep up and see what's gonna happen. But she's always reading, and her team is always reading too, and they're always looking for books that are about women who do amazing things or who have done amazing things. So I felt honestly really honored to have it be picked out and be part of that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. We have one last question for you. We want to know what you're working on now and when we can expect it.
I don't have a pub. I'm actually still finishing it up, but I'm on the home stretch. God, let it be the home stretch. But I am working on a book. It's tentatively titled Darkroom, though that might change. And